Good morning, friends, and welcome to Wake Up in the Word. Hey, thanks for joining me on a Friday. Let's get a good cup of coffee and head to the Gospels. We're going to be at least three of them today as we have arrived at the empty tomb, the tomb they buried Jesus in. We're going to find out some wonderful things today, so stick around. But I know some of you are wondering because we had a couple of calls yesterday asking about the home that we're purchasing and when we're going to be moving, and thanks for some of the help that's being offered. And so we're getting ready for that process. But of course, yesterday came that time everyone dreads, the closing, where you have to show up and sign what seems like 1,000 pieces of paper, and you feel like there's going to be some kind of surprise, and you just dread it. Well, yesterday was, with all the homes we've ever purchased in our lifetime, probably one of the most special closings we've ever had. First of all, Christy Knowles Agency there in Spartanburg, South Carolina, made the process smooth as silk, and what a wonderful job that they did putting all this together, as well as the folks from Founders Federal Credit Union, where we'll be servicing our mortgage with them. Some great local folks there. But in particular, I want you to think about how many people are involved in this process. Of course, Casey, the listing agent for the Brewskis, and then, of course, the agent that helped us is our dear friend, Jeremy Woods from Columbus, North Carolina, who's so involved in Columbus Baptist Church, one of the deacons, and also an ordained minister, and helps with so many other ministries around our area. And he really ministered to us through this whole process. So thank you, Jeremy, for what you did. But then we also had the privilege of meeting the Brutskis, and Vitali and Elena seem to be one of the most special couples we've ever purchased a home from. And guys, we just really enjoy getting to know you, to find out that you not only, we knew you were Christians and were part of the family of faith, but didn't realize you were part of the church family at Church at the Mill, one of the great churches in upstate South Carolina, where we have some other friends, and we've been there recently for a couple of events. So it's just been such a blessing to see what God's doing in your lives, in your business, in your growing family, and to get to know you and to close out all of our time together in a circle of prayer. So, wow, what a time we had yesterday. We know God's in it, and we look forward to moving into our new home over these next coming weeks. So in the meantime, while we're getting ready to move in, there's something that has happened at the tomb of Jesus. Jesus has moved out. I mean, he is out of Dodge. And the discovery of this has been astounding to the disciples, who, after seeing Jesus crucified, the ghastly way in which he died, of course, the main folks who witnessed that were the women plus John at the foot of the cross. They just could not have imagined Jesus could have risen after this, even though he predicted it, even though he said over and over again, this is what's going to happen. It was still hard for them to grasp. Well, we left off in Matthew's gospel yesterday after the angel. We've seen the angels appear in these first instances, and the angel told them in the 28th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, verse 7, "Go quickly, tell his disciples he's risen from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Listen, I have told you." So the angel is not only there to sit around on the tomb, but to give them a message. He's a messenger. So it says, departing quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, they ran to tell his disciples the news. Just then Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." They came up, took hold of his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus told them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to leave for Galilee. They will see me there." So we have a very general account from Matthew. You know, it's going to get more specific over in John. Yes, it is. But right now we've got the generalities that are presented in the Synoptic Gospels. We see this happening also in Luke's gospel, where it talks about how as they were returning from the tomb, verse 9, that these ladies, there were multiple women, although John's going to focus on one special woman that was there. These women returning from the tomb reported all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Remember, there were other disciples there besides the 11. Keep that in mind. I'm going to bring up something you may not have thought about here in just a little bit. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them were telling the apostles these things. So there's a group of women that's been there and have witnessed that the tomb is empty. Who knows how many of them actually heard the conversation with the angel. But verse 11 says, these words seemed like nonsense to them. They did not believe the women. Guys, will you ever learn? Okay, yeah, the testimony that they're giving, it's not that, oh, they're crazy emotional women. They just kind of lose their mind. No, they just imagine they saw something. Isn't it amazing how dismissive people can be when what you have to share seems a little bit out of the normal? Okay, a little supernatural. Well, that's what's going on here. In verse 12, it says, though Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb, and when he stopped to look in, he saw only the linen cloths. So he went away amazed at what had happened. So again, a very general description there given by Luke's gospel. But John, of course, is going to give you more details. And that's where we want to go this morning. In John chapter 20, beginning at verse 3, it says, at that, Peter and the other disciple went out, heading for the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and got to the tomb first. Now, most folks, most commentators assume that this is a reference to John, because John, in referring to himself, and this was common with writings of the day, would not always use his own name. Matter of fact, in one place it says the disciple Jesus loved in referring to John. But others have brought up the fact that this might be a reference to someone else. One of the other disciples that might have been present at the time could have been Lazarus. Now, wait a minute. Could you imagine if Lazarus ran to the tomb of Jesus, remembering the encounter he had had when Jesus raised him from the dead, knowing they had to cut the grave clothes off of him, and just thinking about the possibility that Jesus might have risen? Some bring that up and say, reread this whole thing. You might assume this is Lazarus. I'm not going to go there. I think most folks say it's John. Either way, the point is Peter, a man who is probably in his 40s, perhaps even early 50s, is running to the tomb. And we know that John was much younger. He would have been in his 20s, perhaps. Lazarus likewise would have been younger than Peter if he were running the race, and so this other disciple outruns Peter to the tomb. Now, that's something that didn't get disclosed by Luke's gospel. Some say because that is based on Peter's own experience, and he perhaps didn't want to record the idea that he had been outrun when it came to finding Jesus. But it says, Simon Peter in verse 6 also came. Of course, he had been outrun to the tomb by, most assume, John. And it says the wrapping in verse 7 that had been there on his head was not lying with the linen cloths, but was folded up in a separate place by itself. The other disciple who had reached the tomb first then also went in, saw, and believed. For they did not yet understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to the place where they were staying. Now, I know you would like for me to get to the big encounter that's in the following verses. We're going to do that Monday. But let's first of all think about what's been said right here. These grave clothes that are so neat, lying separately and in a place where if it'd been grave robbers, they would have probably taken the body with the grave clothes on it. Or if they had decided to rip it out, it would have been a mangled mess. But no, what they see is a neatly set apart display of the grave clothes, including the head napkin off by itself. Now, some have said that symbolizes some things. Others have said, oh, that's something that's gone around the internet and you can't stop it. But no, that's not true. That's been debunked. The idea that folding the napkin there is similar to what someone would do at a Jewish household that says, I'm returning, I'm coming back, because if you just left your napkin crumpled, it means you're finished, you're done with the meal. But if you folded it a certain way, then it meant I'm coming back. I'm just going out for something and I will return. Well, that's convenient, but that's not the direction you need to go here. The picture you need to see is that these burial clothes have been left this way for a reason. Barclay puts it this way. He says the mixture of ointments and aloes and spices would dry and harden the linen cloths, making something of a mummy or a cocoon. And the normal removing of these would require some tearing or cutting. Peter saw that it was no normal removal of the burial wrappings. The whole point of the description is that the grave clothes did not look as if they had been put off or taken off. They were lying there in their regular folds as if the body of Jesus had simply evaporated out of them. Now that leads toward some things that are often talked about as far as the Shroud of Turin is concerned. Now, I don't want to get into that whole controversy. That would take about an hour's worth of video. But there's many things that seem to lend toward its authenticity. If the wrappings were there, a shroud had been laid over it, it would perhaps have turned out exactly the way the Shroud of Turin did. Whether or not that's authentic or not does not matter. Fact is, Jesus is risen and he's left the grave clothes there in such a fashion that you can tell something has happened. He goes on to say the neat, orderly arrangement of those linen cloths showed that a human hand, at least not in any way that was immediately apparent, did not remove the burial wrappings of Jesus. All this demonstrated that something absolutely unique had happened in this now empty tomb. We're going to be exploring all those evidences one by one next week in Wake Up in the Word. So as you worship with God's people somewhere this week, get ready for a wonderful, adventurous week next week as we look at all the evidences for the greatest event in all human history, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. You have a blessed day, and I'll see you then when we wake up in His Word.